From the KRWG studios in Las Cruces, New Mexico, good evening. I'm Sloan Patton. We're here tonight for the New Mexico State Senate debates. I'm joined by our partner, the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce. The questions are known only by me and my team in the chamber. The candidates have no prior knowledge of those questions. The rules are simple tonight. We'll alternate between KRWG and chamber questions. The candidates have up to a minute to respond, and they should not mention their opponent in their answers. I trust the candidates will keep their answers short and to the point so that we can get to as many questions as possible. It's my pleasure to introduce the candidates from District 31, Joseph Cervantes and Brett Preston, as well as Chamber of Issues and Government Affairs from the Chamber of Commerce, Steve Newby. Steve has the first question.
Thank you. Mr. Cervantes, 3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers, which has cost our state hundreds of jobs. What is your position on expanding informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
Our goal has to be to preserve the idea behind the spaceport and at the same time protect New Mexico citizens. And so while I support the idea of providing some protections, the way to do that is going to be the way most of us protect ourselves, which is through insurance. In other words, people in business, people in any business protect themselves by insuring themselves. And that's ultimately the best solution rather than just providing a blanket immunity. I'm always very cautious when we take one business and isolate that business and then decide we're going to give preferential treatment or special treatment to any one business. You as an architect, you and many of your members of your chamber would all like to have preferential treatment, but we always have to be very cautious about starting down that roadway.
Thank you. Mr. Preston.
As an industry, spaceflight, it's inherently dangerous. So informed consent is probably important. As far as protecting one specific industry, it's the nature of the business being spaceflight. I don't see any preferential treatment being granted, but if we're down the road, if we're going down the road to create an industry such as this, I think we need to take all the steps necessary to protect the companies and the people of New Mexico at the same time.
Thank you.
Mr. Preston, do you support the expansion of Medicaid as a part of federal health reform? If so, why? And if not, why not?
No. Expansion, no. The 4-to-1 payment that we're promised, I don't have any confidence that it'll be there for us. I think the state of New Mexico needs to take some other econometric steps to ensure that the people are protected. The business model isn't going to work. And as a businessman, it doesn't take much to research it and look at it to realize that we would be committing a lot of money down a road and not get the results in the future. There's just no certainty of it.
Well, I'm pleased to support the expansion, and I'm glad to know the governor seems to be moving in that direction as well. Medicaid is an essential part of our healthcare delivery system in New Mexico. And it's correct, the federal government matches at least 3 or 4 to 1 every dollar the state puts in. So it would be cost foolish for us not to put an investment of $1 and then have the federal government come back with $3 or $4 for every dollar invested. These are the funds that keep doctors in our community. They pay for many of the medical services at our hospital for people that are indigent and can't pay. And if we cut out that funding and we eliminate Medicaid, then we're going to lose doctors, we're going to put hospitals under, and the rest of us who do provide insurance coverage to our employees and others who rely on healthcare won't have those resources available.
Mr. Cervantes, many experts in education say today's students will be in careers that do not even exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce to fit the changing job environment?
Well, the great opportunity I've had is to raise 3 daughters through our local public schools, and Jennifer and I have both watched them and watched the changes in education and the opportunities for them change. What's most important is knowing that there'll be a job for them when they get out of our colleges and universities here, and that means working right now through the Department of Higher Education in the funding formula. The changes that are being proposed will assure that the jobs being created in our economy are the jobs that we're graduating people from our colleges to fill.
Thank you. Mr. Preston.
My brother is probably uniquely qualified to answer this question. He went through Johns Hopkins and entered a career that didn't exist. And he's always want to say that he's one of this is the changes that are happening in our society right now. He's a senior research scientist. He was at Pfizer, and he's at another pharmaceutical company now. But what can education do? I don't know specifically. But we do have to keep teaching the core subjects to our students because they have to be able to adapt. And that's probably one of the things that we need to probably do a better job of, is to figure out a way to keep their eyes open, to innovate, and to progress.
Thank you.
Do you support the national monument in the Oregon Mountains and surrounding areas that have been proposed to President Obama? Yes or no, and why?
No. It's unsustainable. It's really a waste of effort. The Oregon Mountains in and of itself, yes. But the expansion, no. It is way too much area. It's going to impact the lives of a lot of people. And if anybody has spent any time in the various areas that have been attached to this monument, it's gone out of control. The Oregons are a beautiful setting. They need to be protected. But you've got a lot of ranchers, you've got a lot of industries, you've got a lot of lives in the balance for what they're trying to propose that really can't be maintained the way that they want it to be.
I do support these initiatives, and I'm pleased to see the hard work that's gone into this over the years. The many city council meetings, county commission meetings, the public has been involved in this debate from the onset. And our federal delegation, our senators and congressmen in Washington have done a very good job of trying to bring in all of the ranchers and others who have expressed interests and concerns about this legislation. As a result of all of those efforts, I'm persuaded that we now have the best possible compromise between trying to protect our natural environment and what makes us great as a community, our natural environment, our beautiful views, our clean air, and everything else that we can be proudest of in this community, and at the same time recognize that we need to grow and we need to be able to expand our economic opportunities.
Mr. Cervantes, because of our available land, moderate climate, and proximity to the border, the Southwest is very attractive to businesses looking to relocate or expand. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development despite our low budget for economic development compared to our neighboring states?
What I'd like to see us doing a little bit more of is working harder to grow the businesses who are already here. My experience in the legislature over the last 12 years is that too often times we spend a great deal of effort trying to bring in the latest and greatest economy or latest and greatest venture. So we've had things like Eclipse Aviation come in, offer them a great many financial and economic incentives, only to have them fail. The Rocket Racing League is probably another good local example, and we could go through the list of businesses we work really hard to bring here and then don't pan out. What we don't do enough of is protecting the businesses who have already been here for a generation or two or three, and protecting and growing the businesses such as our university here at New Mexico State, White Sands, NASA, and all of the other businesses who we know are committed to our community and will stay here. We need to be working harder to help them succeed.
Mr. Preston?
I live and breathe this. I'm uniquely qualified to talk about this particular subject. For the past 22 years, on November 1st, I've been working with industries in both West Texas, southern New Mexico, and the state of Mexico, or the state of Chihuahua in Mexico. I know what it takes to attract a company. I know what it takes to retain them. I know why they leave usually. It's complex. We can't grow a company. We can't help them grow, but we can do things as legislators to encourage them to stay. The things that attract an industry are usually business driven. They're not coming here for views and mountains. They're coming here because of industries that are also in the area. But as far as what we can do as legislators is to create an environment where it is not burdensome for them to stay and to thrive.
New Mexico ranks 49th, that's second to last, of course, in child welfare. What are your plans, specific plans, to improve child welfare in New Mexico?
49th. Now that's a new one. I knew we were low. Child welfare, I don't have specific plans for. This is my first term running as a senator. What I have studied on the process, jobs. If we have higher employment, our children are going to be in better shape. If the dad is working, mom can stay home, the children are in better shape. To have a system where we continue to look toward welfare rather than looking to grow the economy and growing and thriving as a state is probably the wrong direction to go anyhow.
We've made some very drastic cuts over the last 4 years as our economy has slowed in New Mexico to the programs that have hurt children. We've cut our teaching positions, we've increased our classroom sizes, we've cut back on construction of new schools. All of these things have had a negative consequence to New Mexico's children. And so we have to begin to reinvest the proper resources into the fundamentals of children and families, which begins with education. We have too many people in New Mexico who are not graduating from high school. We have too many who are not entering college prepared to succeed in college. And so it begins at the earliest ages, and that's the way ultimately we're going to benefit the children in this community, is to make sure they succeed in school and that both the children and their families recognize the essential component that education is to their long-term success. And we all know the statistics. You're not going to get the job, you're not going to get the income. It's not just dad working and mom staying at home anymore. Mom's working now too, and women and men are working to try and put money and food into the family.
Mr. Cervantes, Doñana County, the city of Las Cruces, receives millions of dollars for infrastructure and projects each year, which provides a large impact on our local economy. Just last week, the governor in the Chamber Update Luncheon suggested a different capital outlay process that prioritize projects statewide. What is your position on reforming the capital outlay process?
Well, it's a good question. It goes back to an earlier question, which is the idea that government does not help businesses grow. You as an architect, of course, know that's not accurate. You rely upon government spending in projects like capital outlay to build new schools, to build our new Performing Arts Center, our convention center, and many other projects here in Las Cruces that you as an architect work with. And so the government is an integral partner at times, and our White Sands partnership, our university partnership, and our public schools are all good examples of where that happens. When it comes down to public capital outlay, every governor comes in and talks about the need to prioritize and reform our system, yet none of them really do it. In this last session, very few cuts were made to capital outlay by this governor, and in fact, some of those cuts were counter to exactly what her policy is. The policy she articulates is the right policy, which is you shouldn't partially fund projects. But in my own district in Anthony, she cut half of the capital outlay for one project, which did exactly the opposite of what she said she wants to do. It's the right policy. You just need to know how to implement that policy.
Mr. Preston.
Thank you. Capital, the question on capital outlay or redistributing, and as far as what the governor has proposed to change, the money probably should be best spent in areas which best benefit companies and growth. Infrastructure, water, sewer, life safety issues, roads. If she is proposing, and I haven't read this new proposal, maybe there's a move afoot to invest in the areas where it's needed most. Santa Teresa in particular has some very pressing needs right now for capital funds for infrastructure, water, sewer, fire safety systems, and the like.
So we live in the desert with a very limited water supply, but we don't have any restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why?
We have a phenomenal amount of restrictions on development. It is incredibly difficult for any company to do anything in this region of the state. As As an example, there's a company up in Santa Teresa that had a 40,000 square foot building. They were looking to expand. It took them 2 months just to get a building permit. The problems that are put in front of a business to do anything are monumental. I have another customer that's out in Santa Teresa. They have a 30-acre lot. They wanted to divide it into thirds. 18 months for a subdivision. New Mexico could do a lot more to smart develop. But there is not any easy way to develop in this region of the state.
We've actually in New Mexico passed the Subdivision Act, which has been an important piece of legislation. And if you don't understand or appreciate that, then you don't realize the demands on our colonias, which our county is full of. These colonias were developed by people without putting in roads, without water, sewer, without basic infrastructure. And so we passed necessary laws to make sure that doesn't happen anymore, and they've had the intended effect. We don't have these colonias being sprouting about in the county as they did in the past. We do need to make sure that those regulations on colonias development and any other subdivision don't become an impediment to development. But quite frankly, anybody who's been in Las Cruces for the last 10 years knows that there were very few impediments to housing growth and construction development in this county and in this city in the past. We saw explosive growth here in Las Cruces and in the county, and those regulations and laws did not interfere with that development and growth. In fact, in some cases, they weren't followed strictly enough, and that's led to many of our problems.
Mr. Cervantes, Governor Martinez continues to fight to repeal a 2003 law authorizing New Mexico to issue driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. What is your position on providing driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, and why?
I have voted to repeal the current law, which has become a source of abuse. We have people coming from not only around the country but around the world to New Mexico to obtain driver's licenses. When the law was originally passed, there were 15 states in the country, and the direction was moving to license people that are in the country without authorization. It was a way to keep track of people, to require them to be insured, and the way to force that they identify themselves. But unfortunately, it's become a source of abuse, and because it became a source of abuse, it's been repealed in most states. New Mexico is about the last state that still follows this policy. The state of Washington is the last state, and it's talking a great deal about repealing that law as well. So we can't afford to isolate ourselves as a state and be the only state that follows this policy. Nonetheless, the problem is that we have a national immigration problem that needs to be solved at the federal level, and continuing to try and make this a state issue causes problems for Arizona, New Mexico, and throughout the South in any state that tries to pass immigration policy.
Mr. Solz. Excuse me, Mr. President.
It was a bad piece of legislation when it was enacted. It is the right thing to do to repeal it. If any of you have traveled, a passport and your driver's license is usually all you need to travel in any other country. Anybody here would enjoy the same benefit. Illegal immigration, by us validating it with a source of identification, was the wrong way to go. And it being repealed is the right thing to do.
Thank you.
New Mexico has one of the highest death rates of prescription drugs. It's even higher than with illegal drugs. How do you plan to address the problem of prescription drug abuse in our state?
Clearly, prescription drug abuse is probably matching up with illegal drug abuse as well. It probably comes down to education, job opportunities, and information, and also treatment. But the key thing is education.
This is again an area where New Mexico has led the country. In the past, the abuse used to be the production of methamphetamine, and that was done by taking cold remedies in drugstores and then processing that illegally to create meth. New Mexico has adopted regulations and requirements that now track the use and the sale of those drugs very carefully, be it from Walgreens. You used to be able to go get your cough medicine there in the aisles. Now you have to be able to go up, take a card up, and register that purchase. And the reason for that is to control these abuses. What we need to do is to empower the state agencies that oversee prescriptive medication authorizations. So we need to be watching what doctors are doing. And we see that. Even locally, there have been some recent enforcement efforts to try and track what may be the abusive over prescriptive use of medications by doctors. And ultimately, the state medical boards and medical societies can monitor that to assure those abuses don't take place.
Mr. Cervantes, in 2012, a bill to require valid ID to vote in New Mexico was shot down for the 4th year in a row. What is your position on requiring valid ID to be presented in order to vote, and why?
Well, right now, New Mexico does have laws in place that require identification. I'll be the first to say that they're not enforced consistently and probably not enforced as they should be. But in New Mexico, you are required to make some form of identification at the polls. The issue about photo identification is now the subject of a great deal of litigation around the country. In fact, most courts are striking down those laws because the courts are finding that those laws tend to alienate and disproportionately affect elderly and seniors who don't have driver's licenses, and they tend to disproportionately affect certain minority groups. There are solutions to this, but just a blanket requirement for a photo identification would do exactly that in New Mexico, which celebrates its diversity and its seniors. And so we have to be able to assure that there is a way to identify people properly. I would note that there is almost no evidence of voter fraud occurring at the polls by anybody misrepresenting their identity. There is fraud, and we've seen it in Sunland Park and elsewhere, but it's not because of people misrepresenting themselves at the polls.
Why is it wrong to have a photo identification? If you get a voter registration card, why not integrate it with a photo? Even the elderly will be happy to have a photo. And I think the elderly are more concerned about the way our country's going and the way certainly the state is going, and having these kind of allegations and issues. It's a real black eye to have Sunland Park in the national news. And it's something that could have been avoided with a simple application of a photo on your voter registration card.
Well, we're getting close to our time for tonight, so I want to ask both of you to just in one sentence sum up what you want to do if elected. What's the single most important contribution you hope to make if elected?
And I get to go first. Just to make a difference. Nobody called me to run for this office. I became very concerned. I became motivated, and I saw that things are happening, particularly in southern New Mexico, Doña Ana County and Santa Teresa, Anthony, that area, where I saw an opportunity to really see southern New Mexico lead the state in job growth and job creation. And that's what I'm looking to attain if I get into office.
Mr. Cervantes?
I feel very blessed because I work in a community where my parents still live and where they built their businesses, and where my brother and my sister still live and built their businesses, and Jennifer and I have been able to raise a family here. I'd like to believe that my children and their friends, who are now my friends, would have the same opportunity coming out of college to stay in our wonderful community. And the most painful thing is to see people, young people with bright futures, having to leave our community or talking about leaving our community just to find work and having to leave their families behind. We're losing one of our most valuable resources if we can't keep those young people here. And so our goal has to be able to provide jobs for people coming out of this university where we are today, to find the jobs and be able to stay in this community, raise their children here, and be contributing members to our future in this community. I believe my experience here as a businessman, with our family in farming, and as a lawyer have given me the opportunity to know what it is to assure those jobs are going to be there. And that'll be my goal to continue to be able to do in Santa Fe, is to make this the kind of state I want my children to be able to inherit.
Joseph Cervantes, Brett Preston from District 31. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And welcome back. Now we head over to District 34 with Ellen Weedham and Ron Griggs. Steve has the first question.
Mrs. Weedham, 3 years ago. Ms. Weedham. 3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers, which has cost our state hundreds of jobs so far. What is your position on expanding informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
Well, golly gee willikers, I just happen to have some information here about that. The bill was introduced in this 2012 regular session and by Senator Mary Kay Papin, and it died. And I think that's really too bad. I went and read the bill, And I also read what is a very informative document that anyone who's interested in a bill should be reading, and that's the Fiscal Impact Report. And the Fiscal Impact Report, the legislative analyst who wrote it up was very concerned about this, said that not passing this bill is going to be really damaging for us. And there's projected 2,000 jobs that will be available as a result of the spaceport altogether, and it's going to be, you know, we might lose those. And we've already invested, what is it, some $209 million in the spaceport. So I would certainly vote for that.
Mr. Griggs.
Thank you for the question. You know, as Ellen has said, New Mexico's invested millions and millions of dollars in the spaceport. And in order to get the benefit of what we've done, we need to provide some protection for companies that utilize the spaceport. And I believe it's important that a bill such as this one pass. And I will certainly support that if that time comes, or when it comes.
Thank you.
And Mr. Griggs, do you support the expansion of Medicaid as part of federal health reform? Why or why not?
You know, currently the governor has not even made her decision on this particular issue. The presidential race will have an impact potentially on whether or not this should be expanded. It's a very difficult question. The amount of information that is out there that we don't have the opportunity to have all of that information ourselves. So currently I would tell you that the information that says that New Mexico can't afford it may be accurate, but the information that sits there and says that we've got hundreds of thousands or over 100,000 people who would be eligible, and those people are going to cost us some way, somehow, do right now if they come utilize the hospitals or so. So I believe it's an issue that really needs a lot of deeper information for me to make that ultimate decision.
Okay.
I really am in favor of this. I've looked up some information about it, and I'd like to say for those who have been getting scared by all this stuff about if you don't get the health insurance, you're going to have to pay, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars in penalty. Chief Justice Roberts, in his decision on page like 47 or so, there's a footnote that says they've estimated that for a family of 4 with an income of $35,000, the amount of the penalty would be $720, which is probably less than they pay for 1 month of insurance. So if you think you're all healthy and you don't want to have insurance, you're not going to be severely impacted by having to pay that penalty. So that's one thing. Now another thing is there's been a study that has told us that we may have 6,500 new jobs all over New Mexico, and those jobs will contribute to the income and the economic development in each one of these little communities. It's not just going to be in Albuquerque.
Okay.
Ms. Weedham, manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for purchases of raw goods or services and on the sale of their finished product. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturers and service providers?
Well, I've heard about tax pyramiding, and I'm not real familiar with it, but it certainly doesn't sound exactly fair. But on the other hand, it isn't exactly fair that big box stores don't pay gross receipts tax here in New Mexico. I think we're one of only a few states that still let them get away with that. All of these tax issues need to be looked at very carefully. But I'm not going to be, that's not going to be my focus, because I'm a scientist and I am going to be working, I hope, on water issues. I will look to wiser and more experienced people to help me learn more about this and tell me what's going on.
So do you support the national monument in the Oregon? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Excuse me.
Well, do we want to talk about tax pyramiding, or do you want to talk about the monument? Which
Tax
one?
pyramiding.
Okay. Tax pyramiding in New Mexico was addressed for the construction industry in a bill last session. They address some of the issues that occur with that. So as a product's made and the seller, the manufacturer, is not taxed on the goods he gets and then taxed again on selling the product. So those things are changing. We're going to look at if there are other issues or other instances of tax pyramiding. We need to look hard at those because ultimately they make us non-competitive with other states.
Do you support the national monument in the Oregon Mountains and the surrounding areas that have been proposed to President Obama? Yes or no, and why?
No, and I do support the approach taken by Congressman Pierce. I do not. I mean, you know, the truth is, the more and more property that you have the government take over, the less and less property you have the opportunity for individuals to own, to increase your tax base, to potentially provide more jobs for the citizens of Doña Ana County. So I believe the size as proposed that has been sent to President Obama is too large, and the size as proposed by Congressman Pierce is certainly appropriate.
That's become a rather thorny problem, you know, these national lands, in particular if they're wilderness areas, and I'm not sure if the national monument is going to be under the category of wilderness area or not. But with all the fires we've been having lately and all of this, you can blame it on that poor little bear, all the Smokey Bear regulations that have been putting out fires and not allowing the land to be naturally developed by fires that would not be as catastrophic as the ones we have now, which are catastrophic because of the fact that they've been let go for 50 years without, and the forests have become overgrown and now turn into blazing infernos every time there is a fire. I do prefer the larger area if it's going to be managed properly, but that's something that I think we need to look at again in terms of what's been happening with fires in the New Mexico area.
Ms. Weedham, Doña Ana County receives millions of dollars for infrastructure each year.
Who does?
Doña Ana County.
Oh, okay.
For infrastructure each year, which provides a large impact on our local economy. What are your infrastructure priorities for capital outlay in Doña Ana County?
You think we're going to have some capital outlay this year, huh? Well, I recall that in the legislature back in the plush days, each senator got about $4 million to hand out to his various constituents. Each representative got about $2 million. And I recall one of the senators complaining that he always had about at least 10 times as many requests as he had money to hand out. So it's a very difficult problem figuring out how you're going to portion it out. There have been a lot of good projects that have benefited Cloudcroft where I live, and I certainly want to try to do what I can, you know, if we get the money. But I'll let you in on another little secret. When I was up in the legislature, I went to one of those capital outlay meetings to see how they were going to make their decisions. Nobody was there. They do it in secret because they don't want any of their constituents to know who they decided to help and who they didn't.
Capital outlay in New Mexico is an interesting process, but where the state is currently is the amount of infrastructure needs far outweigh the amount of capital outlay dollars that you have. For instance, if you go down to Chaparral, there's a lot of unpaved roads in Chaparral. That could be a real focus for capital outlay. Oftentimes you will see capital outlay used for other projects. Some of them are quality of life projects. But I believe New Mexico needs to focus more now on infrastructure projects than maybe quality of life projects from the state legislature. The dollars are just too limited. And so if the state could focus on infrastructure, then maybe the counties and the communities could focus more on quality of life. And that's the approach that I think we need to take.
New Mexico ranks 49th, that's second to last, in child welfare. What are your plans to improve child welfare if elected?
one of the things, when you talk about child welfare, you talk about issues relating to poverty, or the fact that people don't have good jobs in order to support their children or their family in the way they should. I believe what we need to do is we need to look at New Mexico's tax structure. We need to look at means to bring more jobs to our state, make New Mexico attractive for jobs, and in doing that, I believe we turn around and we improve the opportunities for people which then helps with the child and the family needs on how they can better have a positive quality of life.
This is not my area of expertise, but I must admit I feel that education is one of the key issues. It would be nice to bring in more jobs, but we have to have a qualified workforce in order to attract the companies that are going to bring in those jobs. And we have had a lot of trouble. We're, what, 49th, 48th or something in education as well. So until we can get a handle on that, I must admit I was skeptical about this A through F stuff that they came up with, and I think it still needs a lot of work. But I was very much impressed by the fact that in New Mexico, all over New Mexico, the A schools, the ones who managed to make the A grade by whatever reason, for whatever reason, 41% of those were schools that are in high poverty areas. And I think the first thing I'd be looking at, I mean it's a big, big problem, would be to see what's going on in those schools and whether we can transfer that to some of the other schools that did badly.
Ms. Weedham, Governor Martinez continues to fight to repeal a 2003 law authorizing New Mexico to issue driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. What is your position on providing driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, and why?
Well, in the first place, I think that Governor Martinez still hasn't learned that she's one branch of the government and she needs to work with the legislature instead of trying to pound them into the shape that she wants them to be. There are a lot of people in this state who probably think that actually the driver's licenses shouldn't be repealed at all. You have to negotiate a compromise, and I felt that Senator Tim Jennings did a good job of that when he came up with a bill that would allow illegal immigrants to have a one-year license, but the license would clearly state that this was not a person who was a United States citizen. It was only good for 1 year, it was not renewable, and they'd have to give their fingerprints. Now, I think that's going to eliminate the criminal element right there. They're not going to want to provide their fingerprints to the state. And I think that's a compromise that a lot of people could live with, because this license would not allow them to get on planes and blow things up.
I support the repeal of the driver's license law. I don't believe that illegal immigrants should have the right or the opportunity to drive legally on our state's highways, our city's roads, our county's roads. I believe that's something that we need to address. We need to address it quickly and move the state forward. I believe that we've got issues with illegal immigration and we need to deal with those. But I think this driver's license issue is something we need to handle right now, simply, and just repeal it and then go on to the bigger issues underlying that one.
For Mr. Griggs, we live in the desert with a limited water supply, yet we have few restrictions on development, especially compared to states like Arizona. Should we consider more restrictions, yes or no, and why?
You know, the state of New Mexico, I don't believe needs to. I believe you leave that up to the local communities if they feel like they need any restrictions on water use. I was the mayor of the city of Alamogordo for 3 years. Alamogordo has a water ordinance that deals with when and where you can, when and how you can actually water. I believe that Alamogordo's ordinance is a model and could be used for the entire state as a whole. But you can't look at certain things and say, well, let's eliminate the construction of homes because we don't have sufficient water. I believe government doesn't need to do that, but I believe ultimately, if you don't have enough water, you will, by the marketplace taking care of that, limit the amount of building or so that you have in your community. But I would suggest that we all go back and we look at Alamogordo's ordinances, and maybe if there are places in the state that have tight issues, that they use that ordinance to address them.
This is a very serious issue. We had that conference, the Water Research Resources Institute right here on the campus, and I went to that. And Senator Udall pointed out that much of our infrastructure had been built with not 90% of the funds coming from the federal government, 60 years ago. And that money is probably not going to be available from the federal government when those systems start to break down and need repairing. We need to plan ahead, kind of like in the Bible, when Joseph told the king interpreted his dream and told him, we're going to have 12 good years, but then we're going to have 12 bad years, and we need to start saving now. We need to start thinking now about things like recycling water, which Cloudcroft is doing, I'm proud to say, and what we're going to be doing in the lean years that are bound to come. And we may have to restrict development as one of the things that happens in that.
Ms. Weedham, in 2012, a bill to require valid photo ID to vote in New Mexico was voted down for the 4th year in a row. What is your position on requiring a valid photo ID to be presented in order to vote, and why?
I haven't seen anything that seems to be a realistic way of accomplishing this, for one thing. Now, you're talking about the national level, I assume?
No, here at the state level.
Yeah, well, as you know, they've been kicking the can down the road for several years now. When they first came out with that, I promptly put my passport in my purse, and I've been wondering ever since when somebody was going to start asking me for it. I just don't think that what they have in mind is practical. A lot of people feel it's an invasion of privacy. There are quite a few states that have refused to even allow the state government to implement it. It's been voted to be illegal to do that. I don't think we should be doing anything on that until it gets sorted out better.
I believe having a photo ID to vote is certainly fair. I believe it is reasonable. I believe it's the right thing to do.
New Mexico ranks as one of the highest states with the highest death rates from prescription drug abuse. It's even higher than with illegal drugs. How do you plan to address the problem of prescription drug abuse? Mr. Graves.
I saw that just the other day. That's the first I had heard of that. I don't know, frankly. I don't know. I think that's going to have to be something that we're going to need to look into, but I don't have that answer, and I think that it's tragic that it's occurring. Maybe it's something that could be legislated, maybe it's not. But I really don't have that answer.
I have to agree. It's really a tragedy. I feel it comes from people having lost their sense of purpose, and this is such a big, complex problem. More people having jobs that they felt gave them some dignity would certainly help, but a lot of it has to start in the home, too. My goodness, 50 years ago, in our generation, kids were expected to help out around the house. They were expected to keep their rooms clean. They were expected to help with the housework. I certainly was. And it gave the children then a sense of being a part of the family, an important contributor to the family that we don't see now. Parents now seem to have the idea that they should just try to give their kids all the toys they can possibly give them so the kids will, leave them alone, But that's not something we can legislate.
Ms. Weedham, why are you the best candidate to represent the business community?
Why am I the best candidate to represent the business community? Well, I feel I was looking over what the different legislators that you have and the candidates that are running have as backgrounds, and there's quite a few of them that are business people. Now, I myself have worked in a business. I was a project engineer for several years, so I know something about how businesses work. I've never been an entrepreneur, But I feel that there's so many people already who are protecting the business community that they need someone like me who's got a different way of looking at things. Because I'm a scientist and because I am concerned about water and am willing to provide information about water and our water problems to the legislators in a way that it's easier for them to understand, that they can then make good decisions about economic development, because water is vital to our economic development. So I think they need another string to their bow, and that's me.
Years ago, when I graduated from college, it was pretty difficult to find a job here in New Mexico that paid well. I ultimately wound up working for Texaco Inc. as a landman over in Midland, Texas, and then up in Denver, Colorado. I did that for about 16 years. My wife and I then moved back to Alamogordo, where we bought our own business, a title insurance company. We owned that for 7 years. After that, we sold it. Our employees bought it, and they own it to this day. But my business experience, both with large businesses and small businesses, make me the better candidate to deal with issues that affect business. Matter of fact, I've been endorsed by the NFIB. I believe that, that my business experience makes me the best candidate for this position at this time.
All right. The candidates from District 34, Ellen Weedham and Ron Griggs. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you. Dolores.
Welcome back. I'm Sloan Patton, and I'm joined by Steve Newby, the Chair of Issues and Government Affairs at the Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce. We are moving on to District 35, and Russell Allen is with us. John Arthur Smith couldn't make it tonight. Steve has the first question.
Mr. Allen, 3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers, which has cost our state hundreds of jobs. What is your position on expanding informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
Well, Steve, not only did it cost us hundreds of jobs, it cost us tens of millions of dollars as well. This is something that clearly needs to be expanded to the manufacturers as well. In the last few years, it's been being held up by the Senate leadership and through the judicial committees. This is something that must be done, because if we don't, the party's going to go somewhere else, and our leading lease payer, Virgin Galactic, he's going to decide to go where the rest of the people are. This is something that can do not only but the hundreds of jobs, but also, you know, the millions of dollars in payroll. It's something that is absolutely crucial to get done this time.
Thank you.
Do you support the expansion of Medicaid as part of federal health reform? Why or why not?
Right now, New Mexico is number 6 in spending per capita on in the nation, and clearly, with the size of the population that we have and our revenues that we have, that the monies are not there. And I believe it's very important that we spend the time to work on our regulation reform, we get our tax reform, so that we can get some more revenue in here through small businesses, because we've got to have more revenue before we can expand that that program, because the federal government says they're going to give us approximately 5 years worth of the money to make that expansion. But I'm not sure that anybody's paying attention to the fact that the federal government doesn't have any money. And I don't want to be in a situation where we're relying heavily on that money that just doesn't exist.
Mr. Allen, many experts in education say today's students will be in careers that don't even exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce to fit the changing job environment?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
We know that the information that's being generated every year just seems to be going up exponentially. So I believe it's very important that we educate in more of a general way, which really brings us into bringing us back to the core of what people should know. And of course, in the public education with the youth, we need to know how to read, we need to know how to use arithmetic, we need to know how to write. And I think the curriculums that are out there are getting too watered down to where we're not focusing on those core issues. Because I believe if students have the core issues, then they will be able to be trained in the jobs that are going to be available in the future.
Do you support the national monument in the Oregon Mountains and the surrounding areas that have been proposed to President Obama? Yes or no, and why?
I do not. My biggest concern is one of the things that the side that wants to bring the monument is that they want to protect the area. And my biggest question is what are we protecting it from? The idea that we are, another one of those things is to put that on a registry so that it will build economic development, so people will want to come see this because it's on a registry. And I just don't believe that's the case. The ranchers and the livelihoods that are out there, when the federal government gets involved with those things, they say it's not going to change, but then the second that there's a change within their lives, then we probably won't have those leases anymore, and those ranchers will have a real, you know, it's their livelihoods we're talking about.
Mr. Allen, because of our available land, moderate climate, and proximity to the border, Southwest is very attractive to businesses looking to relocate or to expand here. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development despite our low budget for economic development compared to neighboring states?
Well, those things you described does make us very attractive, but the things that don't make us very attractive is the fact that our taxes are not attractive, our regulation is not attractive, and until those things are put into it, the businesses that are looking to bring their business here and the employees that are involved with it, we are going to have to dramatically reform those two programs to make it attractive, more attractive than our neighbors who are already way ahead of us. And until we do that, we're still going to continue to be a flyover state because good weather and transportation is not good enough to bring people here.
New Mexico ranks 49th, that's second to last, in child welfare. What are your plans to improve child welfare in the state?
Jobs. We have to get those families working, and that's why it's so crucial to reform the taxes and the regulation, because if we get families working, then their welfare will be better. You have to fight poverty, and the way you fight poverty is through jobs. And it's just like what I said in the previous question, this idea of where we've been for so many decades with the leadership that's been here. If these principles that the business-friendly taxes, regulation reform, those kind of things will make us into a place that people will have more wealth, and if they have more wealth, then there's less child welfare that we need to be providing.
Mr. Allen, Doñana County receives millions of dollars for infrastructure each year, which provides a large impact on our local economy. What are your capital outlay and infrastructure priorities for Doñana County?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues that we have in southern New Mexico particularly is infrastructure based on water. And it goes back to business friendly at this point in time. The water issue is something that, you know, if you want to bring in a big manufacturing thing or any kind of population with employees, that we've got to have water. So I believe we've got to get into the infrastructure based on water, desalination plant, those kind of things that will allow us to have economic development, because right now we just don't have those structures in place, and water is absolutely crucial to the development that we desperately need.
And building on that, we have a limited water supply in this area, and we have fewer restrictions on development compared to some other states like Arizona. Do we need more restrictions on water? Yes or no, and why?
Well, there's a lot of water. It's just not usable. And that's where I talk about the desalination plant. El Paso's got one of the largest in the world because the water is there, we just can't use the water. And so if we make that available and usable water, then of course then we can continue to grow. If you don't have water, you can't continue to grow, and then you'll have those restrictions. And so we've got to make the water that we have usable. And it'll also make it, you know, because we still are a very agricultural-based community, and we've got to have that surface water for our economic development just within the valley, because that's absolutely crucial. So.
Mr. Allen, manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for purchases on raw goods or services, as well as on the sale of their finished product. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturers and service providers?
Yeah, that's a big one. Not only does it hurt those kind of environments of what you're talking about, but if you come in and you want to start a business and you want to build you know, make a capital investment within the state, you are paying those taxes along with the gross receipts tax on all the things that you do before you even open for business. And all the processes that are going through is taxing over and over, which is one of those reasons why we are such an unfriendly business, you know, state for business. Because like you said, this pyramiding goes within the involved of when you buy your raw materials, you got to pay taxes on it. When you get it manufactured into one piece, you got to pay taxes on it. When you get to your final product, you got to pay taxes on it. And it's just something that is such a deterrent to business coming to New Mexico. We've got to eliminate it.
New Mexico has one of the highest rates of prescription drug deaths in the state. It's even higher than with illegal drugs. How do you plan to address the problem of prescription drug abuse?
We'd have to pay a little more attention to what the doctors are doing. There are doctors out there that are prescribing to people things that they shouldn't have. But most of this, I believe, has a lot to do with the enforcement of current laws. And unfortunately, this is an issue that a lot of people don't look at as something that is such prevalent that's in our community. I do know people personally that have a real issue with prescription drugs, and it ruins lives. They're very addictive, even more so than the legal drugs. And I think we just got to focus more on the enforcement of the laws that we have.
Mm-hmm. And that is about all the time that we have for tonight. We thank our candidate, Russell Allen from District 35, for joining us. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Welcome back to the New Mexico State Senate debates. I'm Sloan Patton. Up next, we have the candidates for District 36, Mary Jane Garcia and Lee Cotter. And I'm joined here by Steve Newby of the Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce. Steve has the first question.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mrs. Garcia, 3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers, which has cost our state hundreds of jobs. What is your position on expanding informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
Thank you for the question, Steve. I fully support the informed consent, and I think that's the thing that's holding up the whole spaceport issue. I supported it before when Senator Papen, I think, introduced the bill. I will support it again if it comes forth. I certainly hope it does. We need that. And my answer is yes, I support the informed consent for the spaceport for manufacturers.
Thank you. Mr. Cotter?
Yes. Informed consent is critical. We've already made the investment. We have a facility. If we don't permit the liability to be restricted for the participants, nobody will use it. They'll go to some other state. So it seems obvious that we need to do it, and it's also obvious why we can't get it done.
And to Mr. Cotter first, do you support the expansion of Medicaid as part of federal health reform? Why or why not?
Well, frankly, I do not. Basically, we spend $1 billion in the state today on Medicaid. We cover 500,000+ people. We are talking about adding a whole lot of people. And since we don't have the money, and we're pretty much unable to, we're going to have to decide whether we want to take it away from education or we want to put it in Medicaid. So there's pretty much no choice. We have to turn down the new Medicaid expansion and go with the Medicaid program we have currently for poor people.
Yes, I would support Medicaid expansion for the simple reason that New Mexico is in poverty. Until we get rid of poverty in New Mexico, we need that Medicaid. That's all that young people have, young parents. You know, we have the highest percent of children in poverty is in New Mexico. And I'm one that wants to protect our children, make sure that they have good health care, good nutrition, so that they can learn. Without those two things, they can't learn. So I fully support the expansion of Medicare. Medicaid, I think, is really crucial at this point. Thank you.
Ms. Garcia, many experts in education say today's students will be in careers that do not even exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce to fit the changing job environment?
Well, thank you. I think that we need to work with workforce development. Those people that are losing their jobs need to be retrained for other jobs, perhaps. We have to work with the people with the colleges, the branch colleges, and try to retrain when we need to. If people are losing jobs, then they need to be retrained for other jobs. Perhaps not as good of jobs, but it's a job in any case. And I think that we need to use our universities and our branch colleges more to that effort, you know.
My understanding of the question is education. And it really comes down to reading. Nobody gets to be successful in New Mexico that can't read. So if we can't get people to read by 3rd grade, we should come up with a way of doing it and not letting anybody get by 3rd grade that can't read. So in order to prosper in the future, as your question originally was, it all comes down to reading. We either have children who can read, or we don't. And right now they turn into high school graduates who can't read. And we have to stop them at 3rd grade and figure out what to do to make them read prior to going to 4th grade. Thank you.
Do you support the national monument in the Organ Mountains and the surrounding areas that have been proposed to President Obama? Yes or no, and why?
No, I do not. First, it's already public land. So the BLM or whichever agency operates the land pretty much can control what we do with it now. Most of the restrictions that have been proposed come down to, okay, we can't do flood control, we can't run cars on it, we can't allow the Border Patrol to be on it. We've pretty much priced ranching out of it. We pretty much can't use the land as it is. We already have a substantial proportion of New Mexico that we can't use now, or we get very limited use out of. And in fact, if we expand this program, we pretty much will destine ourselves to being pretty close to a poverty state.
You know, I do support the monument because, you know, after all, we are the land of enchantment, and that's what we should promote, our land as a land of enchantment. And it would be a wonderful thing to do. A lot of people are interested in that effort, you know. I don't want our public lands to be developed or see overdevelopment on them or more cows on the lands. It's a beautiful, pristine area, and we need to preserve that, I think. Just as I supported the trackways, I fully support this other initiative, and I hope that it happens. A lot of people want that, simply because we want to keep our state as the land of enchantment. Thank you.
Because of our available land, moderate climate, and proximity to the border, the Southwest is very attractive to businesses looking to relocate or expand. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development, despite our low budget for economic development compared to our neighboring states?
You're talking about the Southwest?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we need to continue doing what we're doing, and that would be groups like Movida and economic development, and try to bring those businesses in here. The only thing is that I don't think that we need to continue giving a lot of incentives to big corporations. My feeling is that we need to help the small businesses. They need help, and they don't get any help like the corporations do. That would bring in a lot of people, a lot of new businesses. Some are too small to even consider going into business. We need to help them. I mean, I know so many small businesses in this very community that could use some help from the state, you know, because they're not corporations and they have to pay all the taxes, and there's no loopholes for them. So I think that if we help the middle class and the small businesses, we'd see a lot of more businesses, not only here but in the state. Thank you.
You're right, New Mexico is not competitive with any state around us. We have dramatically higher taxes coupled with gross receipts taxes that are quite regressive. I watched a friend of mine start a business recently, and he was obligated to file online. Could not do it with zeros, could not do it on paper. Frankly, when he got his first time he needed to remit gross receipts, he had to have a wire transfer. He couldn't even write a check. Well, those are the kinds of regulations we need to relax. Big firms can do it, small people can't start. So yes, New Mexico is not competitive, and until we get rid of regulation and we get rid of our inconsistent tax system, we pretty much will remain there.
New Mexico ranks 49th, second to last, in child welfare. What are your plans to improve child welfare in New Mexico?
Well, it goes back to reading. We pretty much have to have people being able to read. And when you look at the test scores that you get published periodically, they clearly can't read. They can't do math, but more importantly, they can't read. So it starts with education. The second leg of that becomes jobs. If we can't develop jobs, they're going to remain in poverty forever. And so between those two, I believe that will remedy the issue. We also need intact families. We need to do programs where we encourage families to stay together. Right now, within reason, we encourage them to break apart. So if we have an intact family, if we have education that teaches them to read, I think that we'll arrive at the right number of jobs.
I believe that the child care hits mostly the young parents who can't afford to pay to go to school. And so I remember times early on where a young couple at the university would have to pass the child to each other between periods, between classes. That's absurd. I think that we do need to help them out. There's programs like the GRADS program that's very good for teen moms, and there's a lot of them, I know, and I recognize that. But we need to give them a hand up, not a hand out, and I think that we could do that if we just sit down and talk with some of these ladies. They're beautiful, they have beautiful children, they want their children to have a chance in life to become educated and to start reading early. To me, reading should already be done by second grade. Children should be ready to read by second grade, not third. Third's a little late, I think. Thank you.
Doña Ana County and southern New Mexico receive millions of dollars for infrastructure and capital outlay projects each year, which provides a large impact on our local economy. The governor in the chamber update luncheon last week suggested a different capital outlay process that would prioritize projects statewide. What are your thoughts on the capital outlay process, and how would you change it?
Well, I believe that capital outlay has become such a pot of gold out there that everybody wants to tie into it. You know, we go to Santa Fe and there's a million requests from us, from not only the county, the city, universities, the hospitals. Everybody wants us some capital outlay. You know why? Because we need to improve our infrastructure. Everybody's lacking in that. And I've always supported the county and the city with their infrastructure, but perhaps we need to revisit how the money is divvied up. Early on, when I was first elected, it was half and half. Half went to the state, half went to the representatives. But now it's a third, you know, a third for the governor, a third for the House, a third for the Senate. But now we need to go with projects that are already in progress. And I support that. No new programs should be funded at all. Let's go with those that we need to complete. That's why we tell the university, come to us with your priority. Don't give us, you know, that way we just, each of us goes and gets a little bit here and a little bit there. We need to prioritize and see which of the projects that bring the most jobs. It should be job related, those projects. Thank you.
Got it.
Well, I've watched capital outlay for a long time. It does seem like a haphazard approach. Organizing probably will work out better for getting more substantial projects completed. The competition for region will become more difficult because the system now allows each legislator to choose their own project in their own locations. When you turn it into a statewide project, much of the capital outlay could wind up in different parts of the state. So we'll get to see how strong the legislators from Doña County become. But in general, prioritizing probably is the best way, so that we're able to accomplish the most with the limited amount of money we have.
We live in the desert with a limited water supply, but we have few restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why?
No. Conservation doesn't work. We never can become plentiful in water if we restrict water use. What we need, we live in a desert. We need more supply. So we need to either take salt out. They're doing in Alamogordo, I understand, or lay a pipeline and bring water in. It's the only solution. Every 10 years we have a drought. Every 10 years since I've been paying attention, the lake's either high or low. And with that plan, the only hope we have is to bring more water. So we need to lay a pipe. We need to pump it. Mississippi River, take it out of the Gulf and take the salt away from it. But the only solution is more supply, because the only reason we like our valley is farmers. Thank you.
Water is probably the most complex issue in the state of New Mexico. And that's because we have very little of it. How do we invent it? We've tried cloud seeding, desalination, all kinds of efforts. But the fact is that we're in a drought situation still. And the fact is that we're an agricultural community still, I hope. But that seems to be fading already. A lot of persons, you know, communities are urbanizing. It's like they want to get rid of farming all of a sudden. I go to those meetings and I'm telling them, you know what, we better watch it, because they're trying to get rid of agriculture and just make every community a city. I think that would be devastating. How to get more money, more water is anybody's guess, but whatever, you know, they tried in Alamogordo, and I've visited that plant and it's good. We lose what, a third of our water, we lose it in clouds at Elephant Butte. You go through the river now, it's totally dry. You walk across it. It's sad, it's tragic, but you know, we need to work together. Farmers, recreationists, all of us need to work together on that issue. Very important one.
Manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process called tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for purchases of raw goods or services and then on the sale of their finished product or services. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturers and service providers?
My position is that we have to get rid of pyramiding. Exactly. It's time we do it. It's no good. It's double taxation. It is a very important industry. Manufacturing, I would fully support getting rid of the pyramiding. It's not any good for New Mexico, for jobs or the industries. Thank you.
Mr. Cotter?
Well, I also agree that tax pyramiding is very detrimental to job creation in New Mexico. We did improve a little bit in construction this past session, I understand. But we need to expand it, because one of the problems that NASA has is if they try to come in and test something they invented, they have to pay tax on the equipment they already own in order to do the testing, just because they moved it into New Mexico. So that kind of pyramiding, that kind of cost as well needs to be eliminated.
New Mexico has one of the highest rates of prescription drug abuse. It's even higher than with illegal drugs. How do you plan to address the problem of prescription drug abuse?
Prescription drugs, I would say the solution to that works out to be doctors and drug enforcement. We need to enforce the laws we have. It isn't unique for New Mexico. It's the same problem pretty much all over. We often have small numbers, so we can rank really high in things without dramatic extra uses by our citizens.
You know, we don't have a law for prescription drugs that are opiates, really. There's one, Oxidine, I think it is, and one of my colleagues tried to get a bill through in the last session, and she failed, but came very close to it. We need to do something about that one particular drug. It's devastating. They say it's more harsh than heroin. It's getting a lot of people hooked on, young people, older people, adults, and those are the things I'd like to see us do in the state Senate. Get rid of that. Work with the hospitals and the doctors and the entire health industry. We have to work with all of them. Some families are really, really suffering by this terrible drug. You know, our kids are out there all drugged up, not only with, you know, illegal drugs, but with prescription drugs. That's no good either. Thank you.
When Governor Richardson removed gross receipts tax on groceries and medicine, he also agreed to hold harmless municipalities for the lost revenue. What is your position on the hold harmless reimbursement for municipalities, and how would you propose municipalities make up the revenue should the hold harmless be removed?
Well, I support getting rid, you know, the hold harmless. It was a promise, actually. It was intended as, yeah, we're going to do this, get rid of the whole, you know, to hold harmless the municipalities. And we need to continue doing that, but I don't know, it's political, it's very political. Some of the issues you get in there, and some people represent the cities, others represent farmers, ranchers, whatever. But I think that I don't know how the cities would have to come up with that additional money except through revenue enhancements. That's the only way that they could do it, I think, which I wouldn't support either.
Mr. Cotter?
Well, I was working for the Senate when they decided to pass this and add the hold harmless. It looked to me, when I read the bill to begin with, that the hold harmless was not going to take into account other revenues, because what's going to happen when you lower the cost of food, you're going to raise the spending on other items. So some of the hold harmless probably's already been helped by them getting gross receipts from other items that are not food, that are higher than they otherwise would have been. I'm not sure that the gross receipts program that they put together was very good for the state. It makes the gross receipts more volatile in amounts, and so I think they're going to need to get rid of hold harmless eventually.
What educational reforms, if any, do you plan if elected?
I believe it's mine. Okay.
Go ahead.
The efforts that they had this past year to ensure people can read children can read by 3rd grade is, I think, the most important education issue that we have. We already spend 60% of our budget on education. Yes, that's universities as well as K through 12, but we can't allow people to graduate high school that can't read. And so, in general, no excuses. Reading before you get to 4th grade is the most important issue, I think before the state.
In the year 2000, I passed the Social Promotion Act. It was one of President Bill Clinton's initiatives, and so that law is in the books. It's law. And I met with our governor recently, and I said, what is the difference between my law and the one you're trying to create? There's very little difference. I said, we could just tweak what's on the books now. The great difference is that mine had a waiver for parents that didn't want the child to be held back, and hers, and they both deal with 1 year. In a year, if you can bring your child up to speed, then you're okay. There's no big difference in the two. What happened is that it's been made into a very political issue. That's what it's become, a political issue. I feel that children should learn to read and be able to read earlier than 3rd grade. That's why I support early childhood education. Starting for, we have pre-K now through the university, through college, through 16. That's what I support, a continuum of education.
And with that, we thank our candidates from District 36, Mary Jane Garcia and Lee Cotter. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
And welcome back to the New Mexico State Senate debates. I'm Sloan Patton, joined here by my co-host. And so we're going to start with District 38 tonight. Mary Kay Papin was invited, but she could not attend. Neil Hooks is here with us tonight. And so the first question goes to Steve Newby, the Chair of Issues and Government Affairs at the Chamber of Commerce.
Good evening, Mr. Hooks. 3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacked protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers, which has cost our state hundreds of jobs. What is your position on expanding informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
I am absolutely for the passage of informed consent. This is another example of why New Mexico is uncompetitive with regard to jobs. I think what has to happen, though, the legislature has to understand that with regard to the spaceport and the space program, this is a very high risk and experimental operation. So people need to understand that. Because of that, we could have manufacturers and suppliers could be just about as perfect as they can possibly be, and still accidents will probably happen. Take a look at NASA. All the resources in the world and still accidents happen. So I think with that kind of outlook, we need to, it's just not fair to make manufacturers and suppliers be liable for this high-risk experimental type procedure. So the only thing that happens with regard to us not having informed consent in the state, besides making some of the trial lawyers happy, is that we outsource New Mexico jobs, and that simply is unacceptable as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Do you support the expansion of Medicaid as a part of federal health reform? Yes or no, and why?
I do not support the expansion for several reasons. First of all, we have a very generous program. CHIP program is already very generous, 235% above the poverty level. Second of all, by increasing the rolls for Medicaid, what we're really doing is we're masking the problem. We're not addressing the issue of high medical costs, and we're not addressing the issue of the poor who do not have jobs in order to pay for medical care. So really, instead of fixing those problems and having them come together, we're masking the issue, and it's going to only exacerbate it and make it worse in the long run. Last but not least, it's unsustainable. I think it was the Legislative Finance Committee just came out with their analysis here in New Mexico, and after about 5 or 6 years, we are going to start losing money hand over fist with regard to this program. And that assumes two things, by the way. It assumes that their estimates of cost and revenue are accurate, which they never are, and it also assumes that the federal government will be able to maintain their obligations in the long run, which I simply do not believe. So I'm against the expansion.
Mr. Hooks, many experts in education say today's students will be in careers that do not even exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce to fit the changing job environment?
Well, I'll tell you what, the direct answer to that question is we simply put the employers or job creators in the loop. Nobody knows better than the job creators than them as to what they actually need from the students. So there should be a very intimate relationship between the schools and the entrepreneurs. However, this is really an education issue overall. So what's the problem with our education system? Well, it's not money. 60% of our budget goes towards education. On a national level, we spend money astronomically. The issue is that we don't teach what we need to teach the kids in school, whether it's college or whether it's K-12. For example, we teach, instead of reading, writing, arithmetic, we teach racism, reproduction, and recycling. And instead of being able to fire teachers, bad teachers, and promote and pay the good teachers more, we're unable to do that. Why? Because there's no competition in the school system. Vouchers, charter schools would increase the competition and make our schools better.
Thank you.
Do you support the national monument in the Oregon Mountains and the surrounding areas that have been proposed to President Obama? Yes or no, and why?
I do not support them at all. The issue is protection. Everybody wants these things to be protected. However, they're already on BLM land. What the issue really is flexibility on our part. If we give these, instead of just BLM designation, if we give them national monument and or wilderness designations, what happens is we supposedly increase the protection of these resources, but at the expense of flexibility of us being able to use these resources, our lands within the state. And in reality, we're not increasing the protection. It's not going to do anything else for us to redesignate the land from the current BLM designation to anything higher up. So in other words, all we're gaining, we're not gaining anything, we're losing a lot of flexibility to use the land we need to use it for in order to promote wealth and success here in New Mexico.
Because of available land and moderate climate and proximity to the border, the Southwest is very attractive to businesses looking to relocate or expand. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development, despite our low budget for economic development compared to neighboring states?
Well, we don't need a budget for economic development. What we need is the government to get off our backs, essentially, the private sector's backs. We are ranked 49th out of 50 states in economic freedom in New Mexico. In other words, we're very unfriendly to job creators, and it's primarily because of our tax structure and our regulatory policy. For example, we have a gross receipts tax in this state instead of a simple sales tax. The gross receipts tax is bad in a couple ways. Instead of just taxing the consumer directly for the physical product they buy and consume, we tax the job creator instead, and we also tax services. This is a double whammy to job creation. Our corporate tax rate is the 11th highest in the country. That makes us less competitive with other states and detracts businesses from coming here. We have the 35th most complex tax code in the United States, which makes it over 350 tax incentives, but not one of them specifically designed to help business. I could go on and on about regulation, but the bottom line is this. If, in fact, we do not change this hostile environment to job creators in New Mexico, we will never be competitive.
New Mexico ranks 49th, that's second to last, in child welfare. What are your plans to improve child welfare in New Mexico?
I think three things directly affect child welfare: education, healthcare, and jobs. As far as education is concerned, we spend 60% of our budget on education. Unless we're willing to dramatically reform education, which I think we should, by the way, I don't think we can do much more in education. As far as healthcare is concerned, I already mentioned, we already have a generous CHIP program, 235% above the poverty level. That's not the issue, I don't believe. The real issue is jobs. And do you notice a trend in these discussions so far? Jobs. New Mexico lacks jobs, private sector jobs. We need to get government off the private sector back and we need to produce more private sector jobs. That, more than anything else, giving a child's parents a job and success and wealth is better than anything else you could possibly give that child from a state's point of view.
Mr. Hooks, back along the tax line, manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for purchase of raw goods or services and on the sale of the finished product. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturers and service providers?
Well, we've kind of already discussed this, the same issue as jobs and competitiveness. Tax pyramid is just extra taxation on the job creator here in New Mexico. One of the reasons why we're so uncompetitive. Basically, the more we tax job creators, the more it costs for them to produce the product, and the more, and we pass that, of course they're going to pass that on to the consumer, so it costs the consumer extra money to buy the product. If there's any competition in the industry, the consumer will go someplace else. That company ends up going bankrupt, our state company ends up going bankrupt, we lose jobs, we lose that tax base, we lose revenues to the state. So in reality, tax pyramid does nothing but lose revenue for the state and lose jobs and prosperity for New Mexicans. So I'm 100% against tax pyramiding.
We live in the desert with a limited water supply, but we have few restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why?
I do not agree with the restrictions on development. Unless we're willing to sustain high levels of unemployment in the future, simply because we cannot control population within the county, then we should not restrict development. We live in a desert. I'd be more prone to restrict farming from getting any bigger, if anything, but obviously there needs to be some sort of a balanced approach to it. However, I will say this, there are a few solutions, I think, to our water issues here in Doña Ana County. First of all, we need to adjudicate our water rights a little bit better, especially between New Mexico and Mexico. We need to be a little bit more efficient with our water, specifically with the brine water and the brackish water and reuse. We need to drill more wells, and the wells need to be deeper. And last but not least, we need to harvest our trees. 30, 40 years ago, we had 70 trees per acre. Today, we average 2,500 trees per acre. When it rains, the trees suck that water up before it's able to get to the rivers and to the aquifers.
Mr. Hooks, Governor Martinez continues to fight to repeal the 2003 law authorizing New Mexico to issue driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. What is your position on providing driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, and why?
Well, I am 100% against driver's license to illegal immigrants. First of all, it does not make sense. I sort of understand the reason why they introduced it in 2003, but it has not worked. It has not corrected the problem. My opponent not only voted for it then, but she also voted for it last year as well, the modification of it. I think it should be completely eradicated. Why? Not because it's an immigration issue, but because it has become a safety issue. We have folks using these driver's licenses to set up trafficking, human trafficking rings and drug rings. At the same time, shoot, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm against illegal or driver's license to illegal immigrants.
Okay. And with that, thank you for coming. The candidate from District 38, Mary Kay Papin, was unable to come tonight. This is Neil Hooks, the Republican candidate. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Welcome back to the New Mexico State Senate debates. I'm Sloan Patton. Now we are moving on to District 37. We have William Souls and Kathy Jo Alberson in the studio with us today, and I'm joined by Steve Newby of the Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce. Steve has the first question.
Mr. Souls, 3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers, which has cost our state hundreds of jobs. What is your position on expanding informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
My understanding of the informed consent legislation is that it protects people from the manufacturers now. Is that correct? And we are now looking at whether we're going to continue that, and whether that is bringing in jobs or whether we are losing jobs as a result of that. I am not in favor of expanding to just unlimited protection. We need to make sure that there still is a redress form for people who might have been injured by some problem that the company had done that now is taking place at the spaceport. And so I'm not totally in favor of just blanket informed consent legislation that takes away all forms of redress for individuals that might have been harmed by any of the manufacturers coming in. And I don't think that that's going to cost us major jobs. Some people talk that it does, but there are no actual jobs that we know have been lost as a result of that.
Salverson.
I am in favor of the informed consent for manufacturers. Our state has put millions of dollars into this spaceport, and this is something that we must continue. We need to be competitive in order to bring over those manufacturers into the state of New Mexico. It's also real important that we have jobs for the people of New Mexico. And the informed consent, even in the wording, informed and consent, the people that go on these flights are informed and they are giving consent.
To Ms. Albertson, do you support the expansion of Medicaid as part of federal health reform? Why or why not?
I do not support the expansion of Medicaid on the federal level. I believe that the state of New Mexico, after the first 3 years of the federal government providing this to our state, I do not believe that we can afford that. If this was something that we had money and we could budget in order to do that, I would be more in favor of that. I think it's important that we protect our citizens that are on Medicaid. We have 25% of our state on Medicaid, and I think that the federal government does not need to mandate that we participate in this.
I'm absolutely in favor of the new Medicaid money coming in, and under the Affordable Care Act, New Mexico stands to gain tremendously from that. It is paid for 100% through the first several years of it, and then New Mexico picks up the money until it covers 90%. It allows our citizens, a great number of them who currently do not have medical care, to now have medical care. That will save us all lots of money. Most recent estimates by the Children Protective Group in New Mexico has indicated that approximately $2,300 every year is spent by individuals on covering medical care for those who do not currently have it. We cannot afford to lose those. All of the estimates indicate that this would be an economic boom for the state of New Mexico, and many, many more of our citizens would be covered and have health care, and it's a lot cheaper to provide health care early on before it's emergency care.
Mr. Soules, many experts in education say today's students will be in careers that do not even exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce to fit the changing job environment?
Some of the main things that we need to do in education is we need to greatly improve the vocational education that we have in the public schools, and also invest in our community colleges. The community colleges have the nimbleness and the ability to increase job potential, to provide the training that employers need right then, and much more investments need to go into those to meet the job training needs and the retraining needs of that the employers have. Our universities provide more of the research level of education, but our schools, I think, do a good job of teaching some of the basic skills that students need, and we need to teach them how to be broad thinkers, and that's one of the main things that we do in schools. But mostly it's an investment in the community colleges and in modern technical and vocational education at the public schools.
I believe we need to capture these kids when they are in our school system and provide them with a broad and well-founded foundation so that they are able to come out of our schools and able to think. We can educate them so far in technology, but in 5 years, technology will be a different animal, if you will. And so I think it's important that we're teaching our kids how to learn and how to think critically. I also think we need to expand so that we do have things available for kids that don't go to the university setting, that we're equipping them to go out and get jobs. They know how to fill out job applications, and they're able to expand their knowledge beyond just what they've learned in high school. I agree with my opponent that our community colleges are a great place to invest and also have technology available for the next generation.
Do you support the national monument in the Organ Mountains and the surrounding areas that have been proposed to President Obama? Yes or no, and why?
I do not support the national monument proposed by President Obama. The Organ Mountain Peaks consist of about 58,000 acres. The monument that he is speaking of is 600,000 acres. This is 25% of our land in Doña Ana County. This is a threat to the security of Doña Ana County. We would not be able to have Border Patrol and our Sheriff's Department actively be in there because they would be driving motorized vehicles. I don't think in those large areas of land that's in part of his proposal, we won't be having visitors going through that area. I've walked the desert before. It's not a pleasant thing when it's really hot outside. So I think that it's important that we protect the Organ Mountain Peaks, which is 58,000 acres, not 600,000 acres of Doña Ana County.
I am absolutely in favor of this. I think we have an incredible opportunity at this point to protect large portions of Doña Ana County for the future. I grew up in Las Cruces. I have hiked the mountains of the Organs, the Las Uvas, all through those areas. I hunt in those areas. I walk those areas. There is incredible history and natural resources, and if we don't protect them now, we will never get an opportunity to do so. Protecting the Organ Mountains and the Desert Peaks and the National Wilderness proposal that the citizens are taking to the president and hoping that he will sign is an important piece of legislation to protect the future of this area. All of the development plans around that indicate that it will bring in large amounts of tourism dollars. All of the tourism dollars bring in good jobs into New Mexico, and that's what we need. I think we have a great opportunity by having the president sign that Wilderness Peaks initiative.
Mr. Soules, because of our available land, moderate climate, and proximity to the border, Southwest is very attractive to businesses looking to relocate or expand here. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development despite our very low budget for economic development compared to our neighboring states?
I think one of the biggest things we need to do, and one of the things I'll do when I get up to Santa Fe, is we need to have the economic committees talking with the education committees. The two of those rarely talk to each other. And bringing those two committees together, I think, will lead to good economic development. Too often they're separated, and we need those working together with our community colleges, with our universities, with our public schools. If a business is talking about relocating here, and I mean a major anchor type of business, one of the first questions they're going to ask, what's the quality of your public schools? And we need to make sure that our public schools and our economic development people work together to bring in those jobs, because we know when those large anchor businesses come in, it's got about a 3-time turnover in the economics for the area, and that's good for everyone.
Well, thank you for this question. I appreciate the last part of the question that says considering our low budget. And to bring to that point, I would like to say that the government does not create jobs. Jobs are created by small business. And so I think it's important that we have a business environment that is friendly, so we're reducing the taxes and we're not overburdening businesses with regulation. I think common sense regulation will help to bring more businesses in and develop those businesses so that people of New Mexico can get back to work.
New Mexico ranks 49th, second to last in child welfare. What are your plans to improve child welfare in the state?
Well, I think one of the most important things about child welfare is that the children, when you think about these children, what is their home life like? What are their struggles? And I think it's important that we support these single moms, single parents, and even children that don't have a parent at home, that are being raised by a guardian. So I think it's very important that we protect them. But also, once again, if we are bringing jobs to these families and these parents that are trying to raise these children, that will strengthen the family. There again, it will strengthen the child. And one of the best parts of all this is that those children grow up. And if we have a great education system, they will be able to get jobs as well. And I'm very excited about the next generation, but I'm also very aware of our importance to take care of those that are less fortunate.
The reason that we're 49th in child welfare is poverty. New Mexico is a poor state. And as a result, we have more children living in poverty than almost any other state. And the number of children living in poverty has been going down recently because we are no longer investing in our families, and we're not investing in our schools. We need to change that trend of investing in families and investing in schools, because we know when the situation in a family gets better economically, that the children do better as well. The Affordable Care Act will greatly improve the quality of families by providing medical care for the adults and the parents. Most of the children are currently covered, the adults aren't. And as a result, the life of the child is greatly affected. We need to turn that around, and certainly I agree with my opponent that jobs and economics appreciates or helps in all of that, but it really is, we've got to change the situation for the kids.
Manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process that some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for the purchase of raw goods or services and then on the sale of their finished product. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturers?
My understanding of the tax pyramiding is it does hinder businesses, it does hinder economic development, and I would be very interested in looking at those proposals and repealing the pyramiding of taxes when it comes forward. I would need to look at the actual proposals and read exactly what's in it and how that is done, and so I would hesitate to say that I'm absolutely in favor of getting rid of it, but I certainly think we need to look at it because the neighboring states don't have tax pyramiding, and that puts us at a competitive disadvantage with Texas and Arizona and some of the states that we compete with for businesses.
I am for the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturing businesses. If you're going to manufacture something, for instance, if you're going to weld, the grinder that you use and the weld bead that you use and the electricity that you use, all of these things are taxed as well as the finished product. And I think it's important that we encourage businesses by not overtaxing them, and I'm in favor of removing that.
Well, we live in the desert with a limited water supply, but we have few restrictions on development. Should we consider more restrictions, yes or no, and why?
That's a great question. I think it's very important that we look at the whole picture. Where's the water coming from and where's the water going, not just where the water is going. And I think a great source of water that has been taken away from us is from the federal management of watershed and them not allowing us to thin our forests, and that restricts how much water we are getting. And I think to answer your question on restricting development, I think that is such a small piece of the use of water. 90% of our water is used for agriculture, and a very small percentage is used for development. So I think our tax dollars are better used not to go to regulating development, but to go to working hard to make sure that our forests are being thinned and so that our water supply increases.
I think we need to look at responsible development, and certainly development requires water, and I know here in Las Cruces that the city of Las Cruces is buying up water rights in order to provide for the future water needs of the growth of Las Cruces. I think it's important that we look at responsible regulation, and particularly that growth is done in a responsible manner so that we don't get urban sprawl, but yet we're able to grow in reasonable ways. And we want to make sure that we're protecting the limited water supplies that we have from groundwater pollution and other things. But I think responsible managed growth is the appropriate way of managing those limited water supplies as well.
Mr. Soules, Doñana County in southern New Mexico receives millions of dollars for infrastructure and capital outlay projects each year, which provides a large impact on our local economy. What are your capital outlay and infrastructure priorities for southern New Mexico?
I think the main things we need to do with capital outlay and infrastructure is we need to start working on and rebuilding those infrastructure projects. We need to work at the schools. We need to work on roads. There are many roads that could need to be replaced. All of those are big economic drivers within the local community. And to bring those kinds of money statewide provides good jobs and rebuilds the whole area. Some of the things in the future we ought to look at is expanding the high-speed rail corridor all the way up from El Paso up towards Colorado and through New Mexico. That requires long-term planning for infrastructure. I think we ought to be looking at infrastructure needs for healthcare that's going to be coming. We need to look at infrastructure needs for energy movement and management. This is a great place to put in solar panels and collectors, and we need to put the infrastructure in so that we can do that effectively as well.
Well, with the growing number of people here in Doña Ana County especially, I think it's important that our infrastructure plans include roads, bridges, as well as utilities and the things that we need to be thinking forward on so that we can better manage the growth of our state.
New Mexico has one of the highest death rates from prescription drug abuse. It's even higher than with illegal drugs. How do you plan to address the problem of prescription drug abuse?
Well, I think it's important that we communicate and that our health professionals are aware of the situations that we have. I didn't realize that our growth rate was that high, our death rate was that high, and that, you know, that makes me really sad because oftentimes those people don't have a chance to change things in their lives. And I think it's very important that we are aware of what's going on and that we're making progress with the healthcare professionals and providing help to them so that we can help the people and the families that are affected by this.
I also was not aware that we were that bad off as far as death rates from prescription drugs. Most cases that needs to be worked out with the health profession because that requires some responsible regulation that overprescriptions or drugs are not being prescribed when they're not needed and that they're being regulated appropriately. I think it's also handled with good education of the public as far as the dangers of prescription drugs. I think sometimes people have the feeling that if a doctor prescribed this, it must be okay, and they don't realize how dangerous those could be. So I think we need to ensure that we have appropriate regulations within our healthcare facilities and our healthcare system to try and mitigate some of that. But I think most of it we have to do by educating people that drugs are very dangerous regardless of whether they are legal or illegal.
Tourism is a growing and important segment of the Las Cruces area economy. How do you propose to better promote tourism in southern New Mexico?
Well, first, as one of the earlier questions, I think the Organ Mountains Desert Peak National Monument proposal is a great way. There are many, many people around the country who go and seek out the various national monuments and national parks and go and attend to those particular places just to see what's there. And I've seen many of the things that are in this proposal, and there are amazing things happening. I think Las Cruces also hasn't marketed itself as much as it's marketed the surrounding areas. And I think we have amazing things here in Las Cruces that we could bring in that deal with both our museums, our parks, our beautiful mountains, the things around the university. There's quite an opportunity for all of those. I'm very pleased that Las Cruces now has a convention center and that we're able to host more events at the convention center, and I think that's good for everything around. And again, we get much of that multiplying effect of economics through the various activities that we can host.
Well, I believe that our people are our greatest asset, and I think that tourists would want to come to New Mexico because the people here are great and they're friendly. I believe that we do have some things already available. For instance, our La Posta restaurant, what a great icon to this area that has sustained and is thriving and doing quite well. It's a great spot that I know many people from other states have come to this area. And I think the more we encourage business and growth and development, the more people are here and the more that's available for tourism.
As we get close to the end of our show for tonight, just briefly, what is the single most important contribution you hope to make if elected?
Well, the first contribution that I would like to make if elected would be to repeal the law that gives driver's license to illegal immigrants. My brother is currently serving in Afghanistan, and I know many people that have sacrificed their life and paid great cost for our freedom. And I think this practice needs to be repealed because it is the security of our state that is at risk.
My main priority when I get up to Santa Fe is in the area of education. Education is the key to economic growth, it's the key to economic development, it's the key to the future. Kids make up 40% of our present, but they're 100% of our future, and we need to ensure that they've got good quality education. My background is in education. It's my passion, it's my profession. I'm a public school teacher. I've been in education for 28 years. I know and understand education, and when we spend more than 50% of the entire budget of the state on education, we should have some educators up there who know and understand good education and are able to use that and invest appropriately in education for good economic growth and for the health of our state.
And with that, thanks to the candidates from District 37, William Souls and Kathy Jo Alberson.
Thank you.
Thanks. And that wraps up the New Mexico State Senate debates for tonight. Thanks to our partner, the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce, and Steve Newby, my co-host tonight. Our members, we also want to thank you too. Your donations help make local and in-depth news possible. You can become a member or renew your membership anytime at KRWG.org. Election Day is November 6th. Don't forget to vote. Have a good night.